got it in their head that I was a father. But I was gonna take care of everything. But God damn it, boy! Listen to me. I ain't gonna take the blame for no bastard child. It would ruin me, man.
Hi, my name is Dom Griffin. I'm a film critic, and you're watching the Armchair Auteur. It's an ongoing video series where I review films, talk about old movies, talk about screenwriting, lots of different stuff. So if you're into any of those elements of movie culture, please consider subscribing. Today, we're going to be reviewing a film called The Devil All the Time. It's directed by Antonio Campos, and it's an adaptation of Donald Ray Pollock's acclaimed Southern Gothic noir novel of the same name. On paper, this should be like a real banger. If you haven't watched the movie and you're going in, it's got an amazing cast featuring Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, a lot of other big names. It's shot on film, one of the only Netflix movies to be shot on 35mm by cinematographer Lol Crawley. And everything about the vibe seems like the kind of movie that we here, me personally on this channel, and people who watch it and people who are into this sort of thing, would like in a movie. It's got like a cool vibe, it looks pretty good, and it's got good actors, and it's based on a book that a lot of people like. Like, that's a home run, right? And while it would be maybe not fair to call this a bad movie, because it is pretty watchable, and I do think people should at least check it out, it would be a massive, massive stretch to call it a good one. So for this review, I just want to talk about the three major ways this movie doesn't work and like why, because there's like a couple of major creative decisions as to why this movie doesn't come together the way you might expect it to or might hope it to. So the number one thing, the major first thing as to why The Devil All the Time doesn't work as a movie is the structure. It's a structural problem. Antonio Campos directed the movie and co-wrote the screenplay with his brother, and is adapting it from Donald Ray Pollock's novel. Donald Ray Pollock's voice is actually heard throughout the movie because he's the narrator of the entire film and all the voiceover. And I haven't read the book, but like I understand enough about the book from having like just researched it that in the book, the overall plot premise of the movie is that it's a bunch of interconnected stories that all take place in this like nowhere town between Ohio and West Virginia, and each individual story is presented to you with this omniscient sort of narration and the sense that they're all interconnected in some way or another, you know, in some kind of tragic form. And then as the book progresses, as you swap back and forth between all these different little short stories, you start to see major connections, either people being bound by blood or by some kind of violence or some kind of like oath or whatever. And in that, it creates like this larger prismatic view of, you know, like what life is like in towns like this. And it creates like some cool noir stuff and also like typical, you know, Faulknerian sort of like Cormac McCarthy approach to telling stories about these kinds of people, right? And it's cool. That's like a vibe I'm super into. I like stuff like that. It's a genre I think is neat, and I'd love it, right? But in the movie, Campos chose to structure the screenplay far more linearly. So the entire movie's plot is like placed like in order. So as you're watching it, it's just a series of like unhappy bad endings that beget further unhappy bad endings. So here's the plot to The Devil All the Time. The movie stars, such as Campos has structured them, are Tom Holland as a young man named Arvin and Eliza Scanlon as a young woman named Lenora. They're both orphans, and like they were raised together as like brother and sister by Arvin's grandparents. Like both of their sets of both parents are completely dead. And in the book, like you find out their story and then other stories adjacent to them, kind of cutting back and forth. But here in the movie, it just starts with like the whole history of both of their origin stories and why everything is so shitty. In the past, you meet Bill Skarsgard plays Arvin's father, who just comes home from the war, and he's sort of promised to marry Lenora's mother, played by Mia Wasikowska, and he doesn't want to. Like, he's not interested in marrying her. He's met this other woman he really likes, but his mother had like promised God that if he came home safely, he would marry her, but he doesn't want to. He's just not feeling it. So he marries this other woman, and they have a kid. And then Lenora ends up marrying like this crazy preacher guy, and then they have a kid. Like, that's both of their lives are separate. But Arvin's mother has cancer, and his father loses his mind trying to help get God to rid it from her, and then she dies, and he kills himself. And then on the other side, you've got Lenora's mother, who's with this crazy preacher guy, who thinks that he can bring people back to life. So he kills his wife, thinking he can bring her back to life, but then he can't do it. And then he gets murdered by a roaming pair of serial killers played by Jason Clarke and Riley Keough, and that's like the first 40 minutes of the movie. It just jumps in with those depressing origin stories, and then you meet Arvin and Lenora, and like their lives still suck, and you're like, oh, this is fucking miserable. There's a whole hour and a half left. On its own, that structure wouldn't be the worst because it kind of feels a little bit like The Place Beyond the Pines, which does a similar trick with sort of generational trauma and like taking place over the course of years. But this movie has so many other moving parts and characters. Like I've already mentioned the pair of serial killers. There's also Sebastian Stan as like this inept, corrupt sheriff. There's also Rob Pattinson as like this pedo preacher. There's also et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's a lot of people. It's like a big tapestry. So if you take away the sort of scattershot tapestry approach in introducing pieces of each of these stories and then watching them all come together, if you just take someone's like miserable existence and lay it out beat by beat, it's just depressing. It makes the entire movie seem like it is about the fact that because this one dude didn't want to marry this other woman, all this bad stuff happened to tons of people across generations afterwards. And it makes it seem like it's a story about like God's wrath or something. And like that's not really what the book seems like it's about. It seems to be much more about the relationship between people and religion, the need for control, the need to understand the world around you, the trauma of like violence and how that can like, you know, really mess a person's psyche up and also affect people in their familial line. Like there's a lot of different stuff at play, but all of that doesn't really play in the movie because you were just watching an endless procession of bad things happening. Really, by the midway mark of the movie, they start to feel funny. Like, when a new bad thing happens, you're not even, like, sad or feel bad for the characters. You're just like, oh, another shitty thing's happened to these fucked up people. And you don't feel anything. It doesn't move you in any kind of way. And, like, you know, all the gorgeous 35mm cinematography in the world is not going to make up for that sort of inert feeling. You never want a movie to be this maudlin to the point that it becomes an actual comedy, which is what happens. Past the halfway mark of the movie, every bad thing that happens, it's kind of funny. And it's not really the approach I think they were going for. Which brings me to the second major issue with the movie, and it's the casting. Now, when you're going to do a movie that's like a cool Southern Gothic noir thing, that is the perfect opportunity to go through the Rolodex and cast a bunch of weird-looking character actors with definitive facial features and people who make odd creative choices with their roles. Like a bunch of kind of like weird people who will really stick out and like feel unique. The kinds of people you want to watch like big blown up close-ups of. You know what I'm saying? This movie doesn't do that though. It just fills the entire story of all these like unique, interesting little characters with a bunch of pretty people that we've seen in a bunch of big superhero movies and franchise films. Like, I don't take any of them seriously in the whole movie because it feels like a high school production of a play that they've never understood. You know, it just doesn't work. Tom Holland, very talented kid. I think as he gets older and a little bit, you know, less like boyish, he's going to become a really strong leading man. But in this movie, he's not given a lot to do. He doesn't have a lot to do. So you're just watching this whole time like, oh, cool, it's Peter Parker with a Southern accent. You know, like, I feel like all the different people in this movie are talented and like they're good people, but they don't really fit their roles. They don't bring a lot to the table. And it makes everything feel sanitized and kind of weird. Like, the story, the meat and guts of the story are dark and odd and strange. And then the actual presentation is all just, like, glossy and weird. To be honest, the only person in this movie who is pretty and still making odd creative choices is Robert Pattinson, obviously, who comes into this movie knowing that his looks and his charm are kind of a handicap and creates some odd, I'll say, decisions about the way to present his character, and he's getting roasted on Twitter ever since this movie dropped on Netflix. People just making fun of his weird accent, the way he moves, all this stuff, and I'm gonna spoil something for you here. He's the best thing in the movie. He's the only person that seems to really understand the genre they're working with, and he acts accordingly, and it makes all of his scenes good. All of his scenes feel gross and kind of like unctuous and weird, and it's perfect. Like, that's kind of what you want for this kind of movie, even though we know he's Batman, even though we know he's like this really great looking guy. He really plays sleaze and slime very, very effectively. And everyone else in it doesn't really do that. They all just seem to be like cute stand-ins for better actors. And that's unfortunate.
And I see plenty of white meat.
And honestly, the final part, it really comes down to the director. Like, I don't know Antonio Campos' work very well. It's very difficult to judge a filmmaker if you haven't seen the other films of his. The only film of his you have seen is an adaptation of a book you haven't read. But I can just get the vibe that this guy doesn't quite have the vision necessary to pull off this complex a movie on the big screen. Having the book's author do the voiceover narration actually really runs that home, because in the actual prose and in the way that Pollock has written this book and stuff and the way he actually sounds, you can feel and hear an alternate version of this movie that is really good, that doesn't exist, because this guy made it instead. Like, I firmly believe that if like Nick Cave had written this script and they'd gotten like John Hillcoat, like who directed like The Proposition and stuff, to do this, like I feel like those guys together could have created an adaptation of this book that was like true to the material while still making it cinematic and interesting and kind of giving it some of that craggly vibe that these kinds of movies are supposed to have. And this guy just didn't do that. He didn't bring it. And like, not in a bad way. Like, he didn't make an embarrassing movie. It's not terrible. I don't think he should go to like director jail. But he took a really big swing, and it happens to be kind of a really big miss. And that happens from time to time, you know? So, like, it's not like the guy sucks, but, like, it just doesn't come together. In the end, all you're left with is a really, really, really entertaining reel of Robert Pattinson mangling a southern accent and talking about chicken livers. And, like, I'm with that, but I would have loved much more from a movie that's, like, 2.5 hours long and had this much of a pedigree going for it in the first place. So yeah, that is my take on The Devil All the Time. It's on Netflix. I do think it's worth, like, a spin. Like, if you're home, you may as well watch it. But real grateful this didn't come out in theaters because it would feel like far, far more of a waste of time. Pattinson's fun, it's entertaining at times, but it's just too dark, it's just too depressing, and there's just no flair. And that kind of sucks. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you aren't offended. I don't know if there's already like a Devil All the Time hive out there. If you have any feelings about the film, please comment below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the little bell icon so you get notifications when I put out new videos. I will have another review out very, 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 very soon about the actual worst movie of the year that I'm still angry about. So look out for that in the next day or two because that's a whole other thing I have to get into and I kind of can't wait. So thank you guys for watching. Hope everyone's staying safe, wearing their masks. Have a good day. Bye.